welcome. I'm here today to talk to you about Windows 11, what you need to know. You're not all here to learn about Copilot and recall, but we will talk about AI in this of course. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Robert Hammen. I've been managing Macs for over 20 years, and for the last 4.5, I have worked for a particular reusable rocket and spacecraft and satellite company who shall go nameless. Some housekeeping notes. Please hold your questions to the end. We should have a good 10, 15 minutes at the end for questions. So write them down and we'll do the catch box thing and try not to hit anybody in the head. We're going to talk about macOS 15 Sequoia. This is the 21st release of modern macOS, which I think means it can drink now. Certainly the OS has helped us as admins drink occasionally. It was announced at the Apple Annual Developer Conference on June 10th and will ship sometime this fall. When exactly? Oh, when does fall start? Mid-September, so anytime from mid-September on. A lot of people were concerned or thinking that maybe Apple wouldn't support Intel Macs. Well, they did sell an Intel Mac Pro for a long period of time, and of course that's supported. I think the biggest takeaway from from the last version of the OS is some of the old 2018 and 2019 Airs are unsupported, but a lot of times those machines are getting to be pretty old at this point. I don't want to get into the consumer features too much. Just going to give you a brief overview, and you can always look at the Apple webpage for it. The biggest one is the passwords functionality that was used with keychain access or also in the Safari app is now its own separate app. And this is also true of iOS and iPadOS where it was in system settings. The keychain access is kind of on its way out the door. If you can't tell, it actually moves out of the utilities folder. But it's still present and it still works because it still has some functions for managing certificates and things that the Passwords app doesn't support. There is also a phone mirroring app. If any of you use Bezel, you can do that right now today on current macOS. So that product kind of got Sherlocked. It's going to be replaced by something that Apple invented. And also when you sign up with the same Apple ID on both an iPhone and a Mac, you can get your notifications from your iPhone or your Mac, which may or may not be a good thing. One nice thing, I've had a lot of users complain about this over the years, is that window management, besides things like Stage Manager, they haven't had like snap to the side or tiling options. So now they've added that functionality for some people who have been looking for a solution for that. In current macOS, they've used a tool like Magnet for that. And again, you can look at Apple's webpage to learn more about the consumer features. But let's dive into the things that affect us as IT administrators. Managed Apple accounts, formerly known as Managed Apple IDs or MAIDs. Apple is renaming them. And you'll get these Managed Apple IDs, for example, when you get Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager. Any of the accounts you create in there are Managed Apple IDs. The Apple Developer Program now lets you assign Managed Apple IDs. And you can also federate your Apple Business or School Manager with something like Microsoft Entra ID or Google Workspace so that people can sign in with their company credentials. And if you're using something not that like Okta, or if you're using, say, Microsoft's Entra ID in a non-commercial state like a government cloud, you'll have to use third-party tooling and the OpenID Connect framework to be able to federate, to get those managed Apple accounts. The whole process of federating was painful because Apple would never tell you, these are the users that have accounts already and are going to be affected when you federate. They wouldn't tell you. They'll just tell you, you have 3,000. So how do you let people know proactively without them thinking, is this a phishing test? They still haven't changed that, but they have basically made it so you can capture your domain without federating. So basically kick all the people who have something with your email address off. Also, during the federation process, users now have the option to convert an existing account to a Managed Apple ID. Although since Managed Apple IDs, or Managed Apple accounts rather, don't support e-commerce, what if that person's bought books or TV or apps from the App Store? What happens when that account gets converted? I don't know the answer to that. And just some changes, again, if the user doesn't respond to the email, their account gets automatically moved to whatever your domain is, .appleaccount.com, which frees up that Apple account. And if you want to learn more about Apple accounts, Tom Bridge is doing a session, I think, later today. Okay, let's talk a little bit about activation lock. This is a security feature that Apple has. You've probably experienced this on a personal device. You sign in with Find My iPhone. If your iPhone gets stolen and somebody gets that device, they try to put it in DFU mode and restore it and set it up for themselves. That account is actually locked to that phone is actually locked to your Apple account. So you can do it that way, the kind of the consumer model. You can also, for example, if your Mac or device is enrolled in MDM, you can send a device lock to the device, which, this computer was stolen, let's lock it. It reboots to a PIN code, and the user can't get further than that. The consumer approach of signing in with Find My, if those devices are managed via MDM, you can prevent that activation lock from being permanent. So you can allow people to sign in and enable Find My, but if they leave the organization, you can still wipe the device. That's been a feature now for 4 or 5 years. But invariably, a lot of organizations end up with devices, whether they were unmanaged devices, somehow slipped through the cracks, or they were assigned before the ability to prevent activation lock and MDM was available. You would get these devices that were activation locked, and you couldn't reuse them. So what you had to do was open an AppleCare activation unlock ticket, and they would give you an Excel spreadsheet, and you'd have to go into Apple Business Manager for every serial number and take a screenshot. If your device wasn't an Apple Business Manager, you actually had to find a receipt proving that your organization had bought the product and send it off to Apple, and it was a pain. Well, guess what? Apple has made this process amazingly easy, and this is available today, which is why I can show you the screenshots. When you log into Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, you can see this particular iPhone 12 has activation lock enabled. It's on. It's user-based activation lock. Somebody signed in with their own Apple ID. Under the same menu where you assign the MDM server, you now have the option to turn activation lock off. And again, this is live today. You can do this today. Do you have something real quick? I had a technician who was like, oh my God, I had 70 devices on my desk that were piling up that I needed to fill out a spreadsheet, and it's such a pain in the ass, I just didn't want to do it. He's like, it's Christmas in June, hallelujah. So, a few other additions to device management. You can now manage Apple Watches via MDM, and also Apple Vision Pro underwent some significant improvements. You could do account-driven user enrollment, which treats it basically like a personal device, or account-driven device enrollment, but these are really complicated enrollment scenarios that require you to craft a specific YAML file and host it on your web server, and it's a real pain in the butt. If you've purchased an Apple Vision Pro, from Apple's business portal, it should show up in your Apple Business Manager. And if you update that device to Vision OS 2.0 beta, you'll be able to do an automated device enrollment just like an iPad or an iPhone. And it also gives you a ton more restrictions, which makes your security people happy. Something I have been asking for years. A lot of our enterprise organizations are concerned about browser extensions. How many people have had to deal with malicious browser extensions being installed on client endpoints? A fair number of you, about half the crowd. A lot of organizations will typically restrict browser extensions only to specific allowed ones, via like a Chrome policy or a configuration profile. But Apple never gave us that functionality for Safari. So most orgs just block Safari extensions generally. Well, now Apple has finally added Safari 18 extensions management. Some big changes in macOS 15 revolve around software updates. Software updates has been a particular pain point on macOS since the advent of Apple Silicon Mac's volume ownership in macOS 11. How many people have experienced issues in the days of macOS 11 and 12 and 13 where you'd nag users to update and say, my computer says it's updated. And you look, sure enough, system settings or system preferences, software update, check for update, current, it's not current. There were a lot of bugs in macOS. Our Apple friends spent a lot of time working on stability, and they've done some significant improvements to that. They've also tried to add functionality to enforce the updates with using some of the new functionality of declarative MDM, which we'll talk about later. But unfortunately, the enforcement still needs some work. So for macOS 15, Apple is moving all software update configuration management to declarative device management, or DDM. So what's DDM? How does that relate to MDM? MDM is mobile device management. This is something Apple developed in the 2000s originally to help you manage iOS devices, because iPadOS wasn't a thing then. And of course, at that point in time, servers were powerful, clients were dumb. So a lot of the way the MDM protocol was architected involved the client checking in and saying, here's my current status, and the MDM server saying, okay, you need this app, let me push it to you, and you're missing this profile, let me push it to you, and so on. So there was a lot of back and forth that went on. Also, one of the big problems with this is, like, for example, Apple will introduce new preference keys for things in macOS 15. So you would think you could just push these settings to that device now when it's not on 15, so when it gets to 15, it'll respect those settings, right? No, that's not how MDM works. Those configurations are only evaluated at the time it's installed and not after that. So DDM, or Declarative Device Management, this was designed in the 2020s, obviously when our clients are a whole lot more powerful. So it's a lot more about DDM policies that are pushed to the device, and that the firewall should be on. And the device is intelligent enough to know, hey, the firewall's supposed to be on and it's off, I'm going to turn it on, without having to go back to the server and say, should I turn the firewall on? And you can, in this case, you can pre-push those settings or declarations to endpoints, and they will be evaluated when something changes. So this is kind of the future of Apple management. You're going to see Apple spending time transitioning a lot more functionality from MDM to DDM. You're also going to have to talk to your MDM provider to make sure they support all of the DDM functionality that Apple is introducing on a timely basis. So the kind of things you manage with software update, control over updates, installation, download, install automatically, that sort of thing. Also control over deferrals. You're still limited to 90 days. I think that Apple's going to keep that as a pretty hard, that's the furthest out you can defer something. One significant improvement is that getting people to sign, Apple, it used to be easy to get a Mac into beta. You could use a cdutil command. And then some lawyers probably got involved and decided that we really need people to sign in. So they added the ability to sign in. You had to sign in with an Apple ID to be able to download and install beta updates, which you could prevent also by restriction. But there's also problems where sometimes the sign-in panel doesn't show up, so there's like a one-line command you have to run to get it to pop up. And people have to have a managed Apple account, which they may not have. So it's a very manual process to enroll devices in the beta program. As of macOS 15, you'll be able to push a profile to enroll devices. Okay, how many people are familiar with the features that Apple introduced in iOS and iPadOS 14, where they would, when you would join either an open or a Wi-Fi network, not via profile, it would randomize your hardware Wi-Fi MAC address to prevent tracking. So Apple has added that functionality now to macOS 15 with a bit of a twist. The way this worked before with iOS and iPadOS is just randomize the address once. Now it's dependent upon what kind of authentication that network has. If it's like old WPA2 or earlier auth, or it's an open network, it's going to rotate that address every 2 weeks. If it's WPA2 or later, I should say, it'll only rotate that MAC address if the computer is wiped and reset up, or you forget and rejoin the network. You do have an MDM control to turn this off. You have that control for iOS and iPadOS. And by the way, iOS and iPadOS are also changing the same behavior to match macOS. The one thing you do not have, there is no global off switch for this. It has to be on done by a profile on a per network basis or configured manually to turn off. Managed device attestation. This is functionality that Apple has introduced in iOS and then most recently in macOS 14. And this is a way to have certificates and private keys in the device that are secured. Because part of, in order, that's cert and a private key are a pair. And if you store the private keys in the secure enclave on an Apple Silicon Mac or one of the Intel Macs with a T2 processor, it's impossible for somebody to exfiltrate both of those and put it on another device and pretend it's a corporate device. They don't have access to that secure enclave. So I think the future of managed devices involves using a lot of device-backed certs. Again, and this proves the device is owned by the org and it hasn't been exfiltrated. It might have been stolen, but hopefully you have processes to address that. The requirements for managed device attestation are going to change soon. They are going to drop support for Intel and also for iOS and iPadOS. They're only going to support A11 and up processors. The one caveat to managed device attestation is if this is only used by the operating system, so things like Wi-Fi or the built-in 802.1x Ethernet auth and so on. If you use a third-party VPN app like AnyConnect or Global Protect and you want to use device-backed certs, you can't today. Today being the key word. There's a big push in the tech industry. Everything's getting AI. Meta's getting AI. Google AI, all your search results. And Apple is no exception. They introduced at WWDC what's coming. It's not available yet in the betas that are out now, called Apple Intelligence. And it really encompasses, it's not like the Cortana or Siri has been upgraded, but it isn't the assistant like you would see on Star Trek, for example. There's some limited functionality. Some of it are on writing tools, things like summarization or rewriting or detecting tone and so on. Of course, image playground, manipulation, take this person out of this image and so on. Smart script. The iPad now has a calculator which does math notes, so you can scribble and do your math directly on it. And of course, Siri has been upgraded. Apple's intelligence encompasses 3 different types of features. Those that are done on the device, those are done in Apple's private cloud compute, which is a new thing that Apple is introducing to try to provide security to AI. And you can read the blog post, the security blog post, to learn more about what they're doing for that. And then Apple also is willing to partner with external providers. And of course, the first announced public one is OpenAI. So you can have Siri, hey Siri, we'll do this. One of the options is Siri can go ask OpenAI. This is probably the most politically correct slide I could put in this presentation. Many organizations and institutions have expressed concern about the AI features in new Apple OSs. So Apple said, yes, we are going to allow you to restrict this. And we're going to allow you to turn off the writing tools. Sorry if you use Grammarly. Or the OpenAI integration or the Apple Intelligence features, or even turn off the on-device stuff. This is an example of feedback, which we'll talk about later, about Apple Intelligence restrictions. Okay, some additional changes to the OS. You can now use hardware keys like YubiKeys or passkeys, which are like basically software certs, or credentials during enrollment. There's a couple of new in your enrollment settings. There's a couple new things. iOS and iPadOS had a welcome screen that you could suppress. macOS now gets the same welcome screen that you could also suppress. And of course, there's also a new key for Apple Intelligence and turning off that screen during enrollment. As admins, we have to deal with a lot of different diverse file formats. XML plists, YAML, JSON. JQ is a JSON processor. That's been super useful if you're doing a lot of work with JSON, but it was never included in the OS. In macOS 15, now it is. And for those who remember back at the time when macOS 10.15 was introduced, when they announced that a lot of the language runtimes would be removed, like Python, which was removed in 12.3, Ruby and Perl. Well, Ruby and Perl are still present and still installed. Okay, here's a big one. I don't think many people are aware of this. When installer packages in the Mac come in 2 flavors. There's a traditional installer package and what's called a flat package. The traditional installer package is kind of like the old resource forks and stuff. It's fragile. You can break a non-flat package by copying it to an SMB share. The one who has been notorious for creating these non-flat packages is Adobe. The flat packages are flexible and portable, and that's what probably 90% of your packages are out there, except if you have Adobe Creative Cloud installation packages or Photoshop or Illustrator. When you log into the Adobe admin console and generate those packages, they used to be non-flat packages. They have now fixed that because Apple's making this change. But if you have Adobe packages in your software deployment solution, Jamf, Monkey, whatever, you're going to need to go in and regenerate all of them before macOS 15 ships to get the new flat packages. Adobe, the gift that keeps on giving. Okay, let's talk a little about background task management. macOS has supported what are launch daemons, which are basically, it's a file that can run an application or a script can run as the system is started up. And also launch agents, which are more focused to something on the user space when the user logs in. These have well-known locations in your /library folder at the root of your drive. But users can occasionally go in and manipulate these. Delete them or launch CTL unload -w to stop them from, if they're admins, to stop them from loading and so on. And these are also common vectors where people get spyware and adware and malware installed in their systems. There may be a launch daemon or launch agent to keep that persistent. So Apple is starting the process of locking down these things. So now, with macOS 15, it supports secure tamper-proof storage of executables, scripts, when installed via MDM. But they also made another change that I think most of us aren't going to like. In the current betas of macOS 15, users can turn off endpoint security extensions. But admins can prevent that, right? No. So, time to file feedback, which we'll talk about more later. And in the slide that I just inserted this morning, late breaking news, in the latest beta of macOS 13, there is an attempt by Apple to address this. However, if you're already using the removable system extensions key in a profile, you can't use this and the new one simultaneously. So I don't think this is going to be a good enough solution for a lot of people. If you have users that are who are real Unix heads, and they're used to setting up cron tasks or using add or periodic, when they upgrade to macOS 15, they'll show up in the background task management and be allowed to turn off. If nothing shows up, you're not using these. But again, this seems to be something that Apple is on the way of phasing out. So you definitely want to encourage people to not use the traditional Unix tasks to get things done and to use launch agents and launch daemons. Okay, macOS has had controls over media for external media for years. And these controls are ancient because they mention things like CD-ROMs and DVD-ROMs, so on. Apple has also made these deprecated. Deprecated doesn't mean removed. Deprecated means this is on its way out, and at some point in time, it's going to stop working. A lot of organizations concerned about data exfiltration, somebody copying, applications or corporate data if they don't have a DLP onto external media. So they've used these tools to block external storage by default. But then there are people who need access for their job, so you have to change the restrictions, which requires a reboot, which is kind of a pain in the butt. And these controls because of their vintage, you don't have options for mount things read-only, or you have no control over network shares. Well, now you have disk management controls in macOS 15 that can still block external media entirely or allow only read-only access, so yet people can get stuff on their systems, but they can't get it off. You can also block them from mounting file shares. Okay, here's another pain point. iOS and iPadOS have had this for a while. If you launched an app that says, this app wants, Zoom app on your iPhone wants to scan your network. Yes or no? So, look for devices like casting or so on. Well, now, this functionality has been added to macOS. Apps and launch agents will prompt the user to approve. So things like launching Chrome or trying to launch Monkey for, Managed Software Center. Users will be prompted to approve or deny these. They can also review these settings in System Settings, Privacy, Local Network. Today, there are no management controls over this. Hello, it's feedback time again. Okay. Starting to talk more about networking and identity providers. A lot of people still bind it 80, which is, I guess we could say that's been on life support for a number of years. If you're dealing with on-premise Active Directory, not in a lab-type environment, I would strongly encourage you to look at Apple's Kerberos SSO extension. A lot of people don't seem to be aware that this is a thing. This works with local accounts on your Mac, and it allows you to synchronize, force the password synchronization between that local account and your on-premise Active Directory. The Kerberos SSO extension, if properly configured, also ensures that user always has a valid Kerberos authentication ticket. So if they go to print or mount a file share or access a website, they're not prompted for credentials, it just works. A big advantage of Kerberos SSO is, one of the big pain points with mobile accounts is if you have file vault and portable machines and mandatory password changes. But passwords don't necessarily rotate unless the user reboots in a situation where their computer can talk to your Active Directory controllers. So how many times, like during the pandemic, did people have issues where nobody was in the office, so they have to come in via VPN after the Mac boots. Their Mac reboots, and it won't accept their password and they don't remember their previous password, and now they're locked out of their Mac. So the Kerberos SSO extension is pretty simple to configure, and it works really well. You can sign in with either password or smart card. They have some new preferences where you can enforce smart card, or disable smart card, or disable password, and also you can build some logic for automatic certificate selection for signing in, with a smart card. You still don't have a logout option if you're signed in with a smart card, however, which is awesome when the user loses their smart card and then can't get out of the Kerberos SSO prompts. But the direction Apple has seemingly been headed for is something called Platform SSO, or Platform Single Sign-On. This is a feature for integrating with identity providers like Microsoft, Entra ID, or so on. And this is actually was something that Apple introduced in macOS 13. However, it was pretty basic. It couldn't create a user account on the fly dynamically. That was addressed in macOS 14, but there were some other limitations to it. So with Platform SSO in macOS 15, login policies can now require that authentication with your identity provider across File Vault, the lock screen, and the login window. You can also have control whether you want to allow or disable Touch ID or Apple Watch unlock. And then you can also configure some grace periods. For example, somebody's on a plane and doesn't have access to the internet. How long can they keep working without authenticating to that online identity provider? A lot of organizations, particularly in the government space, want to go to a world where they want passwordless entirely, no password at all. And at least initially, with Platform SSO still, you're going to need a password for that first File Vault login. Apple Silicon Macs do allow you to log in with a smart card or physical security key. Intel Macs do not and will not, ever. Okay, how many people knew that there's a virtualization framework built into macOS? A few. So yeah, actually Apple did include this, and they've been making changes to it over the years. You can run virtual Macs inside that. You can also run virtual versions of Windows, as long as you have the ARM version of Windows. If you need to run Intel Windows, you're going to have to look at Parallels or something like that. And there are some Linux distributions that are available to run. Some of the apps that are helpful for this are things like Virtual Buddy or UTM. And by the way, don't worry about writing these links down because the slides will be available. And you can get from Appleseed from IT, which we'll talk about later, you can download the actual OS, IPSW, and create a VM in an instant. But there have been some limitations with these virtual machines. Because they're virtual machines, not real machines, you used to not be able to sign in with iCloud on the virtual machine. You also couldn't leverage erase all contented settings. So if you wanted to see test something with your installation workflow, and blow up a machine and you want to take it back to a known good state, you couldn't use erase all contented settings. They have now addressed that in macOS 15. Requires you to be running macOS 15. The one thing that you can't do is test your enrollment workflow. How does automated device enrollment work? Basically, when that Mac boots up for the first time, it has to reach out to Apple and provide its serial number and says, hey, do I belong to anybody? Oh yeah, you belong to Acme Company. Okay, great, Acme Company, am I assigned to an MDM server? Yes, you're assigned to a server at this address. So it's leveraging the serial number to send that. Well, what does the serial number look like for a virtual machine? Not to mention a lot of MDMs wouldn't handle that well if it wasn't a valid serial number. So we currently can't do enrollment workflow testing with a virtual machine. But it can still be useful if you want to, if you're using macOS 14 and you want to play with macOS 15, but you don't want to upgrade your machine yet, you could use one of these applications and create a virtual machine as long as you had enough disk space and so on. By the way, Apple's license agreement says that you can run 2 virtual hosts on a single Mac. If you start up 3, you don't get Tim Cook popping up in a window saying, pay us money. Nothing happens, it's not enforced, but you are violating the license agreement at that point. Okay, so talking more about directory services, Active Directory binding still works. Wouldn't expect it to keep working much longer. Now, if you're in an environment, and I know there are some people in education that are still running whatever Novell NetWare is called today, that use directory service plugins to connect that directory service to macOS. Those are no longer supported in macOS 15, and your directory service is going to be broken. The general trend seems to be migrating to platform SSO. There are some miscellaneous changes to system settings. Here's a great one. When you would open up system settings on macOS 14, what did it default to every time? The appearance profile. Does that make sense? No. So now it defaults to general. Also, there was a dichotomy between iOS and iPadOS. When you wanted to look at, is this device, mobile device, managed on iOS, I'd have to go to Settings, General, VPN, and Device Management. On macOS, though, I'd have to go to System Settings, Security and Privacy, Profiles. So now they've changed macOS to more closely mimic where it is on iOS and make a consistent experience. Gatekeeper. This was an Apple technology to basically prevent unsigned apps from running by default. A lot of people would just turn it off. So Apple would do things like set up a rearm so it would turn itself on 30 minutes after you turn it off. And then they took the controls away from the GUI, but you could still use the command line to disable it. Now you can no longer use the command line to disable it. Here's a big one for people who have to deal with file shares, Windows shares. Have you ever had a user who switched from Windows to Mac complain about how slow it takes to mount a server volume? Because there might be 4,000 or 5,000 files and folders in the root of that volume. And macOS, the Finder spends a lot of time just chugging, iterating through all those files. Well, Apple has made some performance improvements, they haven't qualified them, when accessing these shares. So that should be a focus of testing if that's important to you. If you have workflows let's say the application firewall on macOS, you require it to be on. User can turn it off with the command line. You would use the defaults write command to that preference P list to turn it back on. Well, that preference P list no longer exists in macOS 15, so you have to use the actual socket filter firewall command to turn the firewall back on. Again, some hardening of the OS. Apple does include some antivirus and anti-malware protection in the OS called XProtect. XProtect is one of those things that were dependent on software update to work, and I have seen situations where endpoints are updated on their OS, but their XProtect definitions don't get updated. So there's now a new XProtect command line tool that you can script to do things like check for updates and report the version back, so people can write scripts or extension attributes or whatever to get more detailed info on the version of detection. There are also some additional system integrity protection controls over files in the users folder, specifically library and group containers. And if you're trying to use the DSCL command to change, on the local directory of the machine, like change a user's home directory, like the user, got married, got divorced, what have you, you'll now get some additional security prompts to approve when trying to run these command line tools to make those changes. Another thing that has been deprecated since macOS 10.15 is CUPS, the Common Unix printing services, and PPDs, or PPDs, printer descriptions. Using LPadmin to create these files, to manipulate these, would give you an error saying this is deprecated and will be removed in a future version of macOS. Well, that future version isn't 15. Apple is also making some changes around screen sharing. They really want developers to use the new screen sharing APIs. There are some developers out there, Microsoft, who have still not adopted them, not even in new teams. But that will purportedly be changing before macOS 15 ships. So how do you get access to all this? Apple has the developer beta. They will have the public beta. It's not out yet. But anyone who has access to Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager automatically has access to Appleseed for IT. So you log into beta.apple.com/IT with your managed Apple account. On that site, you will find the What's New in WWDC 2024 PDF. There's also an excellent document on managing software updates for IT that explains how software updates work, and some testing templates and release notes and other things. There is also on the macadmin Slack, and if you're not on macadmin Slack, you need to be. That is definitely the resource for all the macadmins, no matter what Microsoft wants to do with their own thing on LinkedIn. So how do you get access to, there is a private channel where all the betas are discussed. Why is it a private channel? Because of Apple's NDA. So you have to log into the Appleseed channel and then provide, follow the instructions there to provide proof that you have access to Apple Business Manager and School Manager, and then you'll be entered into the secret society. So the betas come out typically about every 2 weeks until we hit that getting close time in September when we start to see release candidates. The public beta, again, should be out maybe next week. There's also another channel on Slack called #AppleDevRSS. Anytime Apple releases a beta update or a release macOS update, a post appears there. So like I have that starred at the top of my list and say, so if I take a minute to look at Slack anytime today, did Apple do anything today? Oh, Apple Dev RSS got an update. Oh, look, it's, a change to Apple ID Connect. I don't care about that. But that channel is useful to follow. And you'll also want to pay attention to the private Appleseed channel for emerging issues. And again, specifically for macOS 15, the first release was June 10th, the second release is June 24th. The third release, a couple days late, dropped yesterday afternoon. Maybe Apple was taking pity on the Wi-Fi network here at the conference, I'm not sure. But. So your betas will keep coming. You're going to want to have dialogues with your MDM vendor to find out, hey, when are you going to support this stuff? And just because they say, we support day 0. Okay, do you support this feature? No, not yet, but we support the OS on day 0. So it's a little more nuanced than a yes, no with your vendors. And maybe they can spin up a beta cloud for you or give you a beta version of the MDM that you can enroll some test devices in to test the new functionality. And it goes without saying, in 2024, you cannot properly manage macOS or iOS or iPadOS without an MDM. It's an absolute requirement. The best time for you to begin testing is at noon Pacific time, right after the keynote finishes when the betas become available. The second best time to begin testing is now. And some of the rationale behind that is when the new OS is announced, it's like a proud parent. They're happy to see, look, this is what I've come up with. Isn't this great? Well, actually, this sucks. So the developers tend to pay more attention earlier in the cycle. As they get later in the cycle, they're trying to get this thing done and out the door. And your feedback is going to be less helpful or less likely to be addressed before the OS ships. It's also important to periodically test beta versions throughout the year because Apple has been known to do surprises like pulling Python out in macOS 12.3, Python 2. That broke a lot of people's functionality. Or the changes rolling around screen sharing were going to be drop in macOS 14.4 or 14.5 until the community pushed back and said, hey, these scary looking dialogues, we aren't the guys writing the software. This doesn't help us. Can you please kick this can down the road further? If you don't test regularly, you better get ready for a surprise. Another example of that, I think, was the airport command functionality changed significantly in macOS 14.4 and later, which broke some people's workflows. So testing should be an ongoing year-round thing and monitoring that channel. So how should you test? Well, VMs used to be the way, but since you can't test your automated device enrollment workflow, it makes it less useful. If you want to create a VM to experiment with the new OS, that's fine, but you probably want it to upgrade physical hardware. A couple of things Apple has given to us over the years: erase all content at settings, and being able to do the easy configurator restore of Apple Silicon Macs makes re-enrolling. We had the advantage with virtual machines where you could take a snapshot and roll it back. We don't have that with physical machines, but it doesn't take that long to get a machine back to a fresh state. Be sure, if you are going to have to support Intel Macs, that you also test this on Intel Macs and test the performance and make sure it's acceptable to you. I'm personally a big fan of the 13 and 15-inch Airs. They're super small, super light, super thin, powerful machines. Easy to throw a 13-inch Air in your backpack and have a test Mac with you at any point in time. Okay, in your organization, who should test? Well, pretty much you, first and foremost, but also your colleagues in IT and InfoSec. Get the help desk on board with it. Maybe point them to this YouTube presentation when it gets published. You're also going to want to solicit testers from your user population, but you have to find the right people. The people who complain all the time, probably not good testers. You want people who are able to adequately, communicate so that they can, say, well, this thing sucks. Well, what sucks about it? Well, this crashes. Well, when does it crash? Well, I don't know. That's not a good tester. And ideally, you would find people across different job functions. You need somebody from accounting. You want somebody from from engineering or whatnot, because they have different workflows and they run different tools than you do. You don't want a surprise. You want to make it easy for them to get access to the beta, but you also want to make sure they understand that they may have problems. And again, if it's a kind of user that doesn't handle problems very well, they're probably not a good tester. Your users will need an Apple account. If you're federated, that's great. If you're not, you can create an account in Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager. That should be a student account, or it should be a staff account. The staff account can't do anything with your devices, can't assign devices, release devices, but it has enough power to be able to use it in the beta program. Make sure the user does log into the Appleseed for IT website. They may have to accept the terms and conditions before they're actually able to sign into their Mac or iOS or iPadOS device and install the beta. So how, again, should you test? Well, first thing I do is I will take an existing Mac, maybe it's a newly provisioned machine, something that's not too messed up, and I'll upgrade it. And I'll take note of all the dialogues I see after reboot, and I'll start testing for functionality. You're subsequently going to want to start take a Mac and upgrade it to macOS 15, and then enroll it in your system. That is going to test things like your scoping of your configuration profiles and policies. Let's say you had configuration profiles scoped to systems on macOS 14. Well, this is macOS 15, so that device may not get this profile by default. Also, some developers get tricky, where they set the maximum. We can install on macOS versions up to 14.99. So what happens when that installer tries to run on a macOS 15 system? It doesn't. So you have to reach out to that vendor and say, hey, can I get an updated package that works? You need to test all of your internal websites, your printer management systems, your application suites, all of your self-service company portal type apps. Do the apps launch? Do they function? Do they print? Who owns these apps? Who's the person responsible for Office in your organization, or so on? And figure out test plans on your own. So I've mentioned feedback briefly 2 or 3 times. And I've had this question a few times. How do I tell Apple that this feature sucks? Or this is missing? Or we need this in the OS? The answer is feedback. Eric Boyd will happily welcome your feedback, as long as it's properly filed. The advice, of course, is to file feedback early and often. They want to see that, better to file that feedback on the Tuesday after WWDC than 2 months later. Feedback should also be used for tech support. Let's say, a new version of macOS 14.6 comes out and it breaks your Wi-Fi. And you have AppleCare Enterprise, so you can file AppleCare Enterprise support, so you can open a case with Apple. The first thing you should do is actually file feedback first, because when you file that feedback, it will ask you some questions, like what are you using for networking, what are you using for this, how are you authenticating? And it will also automatically include things like a sysdiagnose, which is a collection of logs off your system, and a system report, and submit it. Once you file that feedback, you can then open an AppleCare case and include the feedback number. The AppleCare folks have full access to that. It saves you a lot of back and forth, because normally when you're opening AppleCare cases, it's all done by email. You report a problem. One day, they may email you back, ask questions. You reply back. You get that back and forth. If you start with Feedback Assistant, you avoid a lot of that. And also, if you have gotten a machine where it won't boot, if you can do a recovery diagnose from recovery or at the File Vault pre-boot window, that is also can be helpful. So how do you file feedback? You can do it through the Feedback Assistant app that's included in every Mac. It'll appear in the dock on beta versions of the OS. You can also sign into feedbackassistant.apple.com. Now, there are some caveats with this. The number one mistake that people make when filing feedback is not using the right Apple ID. They may use a personal Apple ID or developer Apple ID. These go to different groups. Let's say you file a feedback about the network extensions being able to be turned off on macOS 15, but you file it with a developer account. That goes to a different team. The developer team's looking and says, why is this developer asking me questions about this? What does this have to do with building their app? It's a different team. When you sign in with a managed Apple account from your Apple Business or Apple School Manager, that goes to the correct team at Apple. Now, when you file feedback, you have a choice. You can file it as personal or as a team. Obviously, it makes sense, especially if there's more than one of you, to choose the team feedback. Because what if you go on vacation for 2 weeks, or your colleagues can respond to any Apple requests or provide additional information. If it's submitted just as you, it's just going to be sitting in that black hole till you get back. One more pro tip from Eric Boyd. When you're going through and saying, in what area is this, one of the options is something not on this list. Never choose something not on this list, because that just goes into a big bucket that people look at when they have time, which is never. It's better to file it in the wrong area, because somebody will say, oh no, this belongs over here. They'll fix that, then put it in the big bucket. Your feedback should look like this. Shouldn't say, hey, printing doesn't work. Be more like, what are you trying to accomplish? The 30,000 foot picture. What steps did you take? What did you think would happen? What actually happened? Was there an error log? Was there can you take screenshots or videos and include that sysdiagnose? If this is something that is a deployment blocker for your org, hey, we can't deploy macOS 15 unless we have an ability to disable people from turning off network extensions. The keywords you want to say are deployment blocker. You also want to say the impact. I have 10,000 Macs. And those are things that you should, after filing that feedback, you should also create an Apple Care ticket, and you should also talk to your Apple account executive and make them aware that it's a deployment blocker for you. An example of feedback, this is a feature request I put in that I don't think Apple's going to do, but another advantage of Macadmin Slack, you can share your feedback. There's an Apple feedback channel for public discussion. You want to talk about macOS 14, you want feedback from macOS 14, you can put that in there. For the betas, you post your feedback in that private Appleseed channel due to the NDA. When a new beta is released, it's always a good idea to test. This didn't work in beta 2, doesn't work in beta 3. Also, if you filed feedback against macOS 14, this is an issue, I'd like this functionality, it's not there, best to refile that feedback under macOS 15 as well. Because at a certain point in time, macOS 14 gets to a point where it's no longer supported or no longer being developed for new features. This is a big one I see a lot of organizations not doing, having a documented runbook of what happens during enrollment. I mean, lay it down. When the device is enrolled, these profiles get installed. This software gets installed in this order. We run these scripts, then we turn File Vault on a reboot. Have that documented. If you don't have that, come back from the conference and do it. See, nobody cares. You didn't do it until everything breaks. When's it going to break? When you get a new OS. So why should you be testing macOS Sequoia now? Again, the number one reason is you be able to provide feedback immediately to Apple and help shape the direction of the OS. It can also help you discover issues that may be unique to your environment. It also will allow you to be close to support to the release date as possible. Software deferrals have been a major pain point in macOS over the years and keeping people from updating. So if you don't support it ahead of time, you'll be supporting it on the fly. And it also helps you with hardware releases, because unlike Windows, Apple does not include release driver packages. You know, if after macOS 15 ships, Apple introduces new Macs, they will only run macOS 15. They will not be able to port back to macOS 14 because the drivers and stuff for the graphics card and the processor and so on generally only exist in the new OSs. So if you're not in a position to be able to support the new OS, you should probably make sure you've got a stockpile of existing hardware on hand. And we've seen a general change in the way security. I've been doing IT for a long time, and a lot of times, we had this whole change management process where we'd have to go in front of a change control board with a plan, a backup plan, and we'd have to have test groups and so on. We've really moved on into a world where we get 5 Chrome updates in a week because of zero-day vulnerabilities that are being exploited in the wild. So you've got to get those updated quick. So turning around our updates faster is important. Apple, this is unofficial, Apple doesn't document this anywhere, Apple provides security fixes for the current OS and the previous 2. So right now, today, that's macOS 14. 14.6 is coming out soon, and as well as macOS 13 and macOS 12. The real issue is that not all these fixes are ported to the old OS. So they'll make a best effort, but if you're still running 12, you're not running the most secure OS because there's things that aren't patched that are patched in 13 or 14. So if you want the most secure Mac, if that's important to your organization, you have to be running the latest OS and, of course, the latest apps. This is another tool. It's available from Appleseed for IT. It's called Mac Evaluation Utility. There's a hashtag MEU channel also on Mac Admin Slack. And this is an awesome tool for evaluating a number of things about your Mac, your environment. It'll look at things on your Mac, but it'll also examine your network. If you've been in situations where you have problems with enrolling devices or updating devices or installing software, and you've got like really strong firewalls or proxies, there's a good chance that your network security team may be blocking specific Apple hosts or ports or inspecting traffic. So MEU will tell you with green and red-green checks that things are not, if things are being blocked. The link at the bottom is Apple's Use Apple Products and Enterprise Networks, where Apple defines these are all the hosts that must be accessible for Apple devices to be able to be enrolled and managed and get apps deployed and so on. The sneaky thing is Apple changes the list of servers on the regular, but they do not post a changelog. So your best bet is to use Mac Evaluation Utility periodically to examine your network. But MEU can also do things like scan for 32-bit apps that won't work any longer, or Intel-only apps, or apps that use the old screen sharing API, or if you have duplicate preference keys in your profile. So it's super useful to run Mac Eval Utility at least once on your system. And again, if you have those network concerns, probably want to run it every couple of months, and at every site too. This is always a good time of year to evaluate your environment. Am I still binding to AD? Why? What am I going to do when AD binding goes away? Start making those plans today so you're not scrambling to do it next year. Are you happy with your security tools? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, and keep your security tools closest. Generally, the recommendation is keep those vendors on a 1-year contract. That way, if somebody drops the ball with an OS release, it's easy to fire them and pick another tool. If you have a lot of Apple devices on your network, users not remote, or if you have users who are remote and you're using full tunnel VPN, where all traffic to the internet goes to your network, you should probably consider installing a caching server. This can be done on any Mac. Mac Minis are great for this. You can put one in a data center, in a rack. It's just something you simply turn on. The way the caching server works is when it fires up, it registers with Apple and says, hey, I'm a caching server coming from this IP address or IP address range. You can define it depending how your network is configured. And Apple says, great. So then when my Mac goes to check for an update, talks to Apple, Apple says, oh, yep, there's an update, and go get it from this caching server over here on your network. So rather than the update being pulled down over the internet, it queries my caching server. The caching server says, do I have this update? If the answer is yes, it just serves it to me. If no, it pulls it down. So it can save tons of bandwidth. True story, when the macOS 14.5 and iOS and iPadOS 17 releases came out, the next day I got a message from a network team saying, what host is at this address? Oh, it's my caching server. Oh, it's maxed out its gigabit Ethernet interface for like the last 12 hours because I had tens of thousands of Apple devices hammering it, pulling updates down. So now I have a new Mac Mini with a 10 gig Ethernet interface, but I digress. Deferrals. Do you really need deferrals? I don't use deferrals, and my life is much easier for it. Got 99 macOS problems, but a deferral profile ain't one, son. And true story, this guy, this kid, check his LinkedIn. He works for Apple. Okay, let's talk a little bit too about security and compliance. Compliance was something that basically people in the government and heavily regulated industries used to care about. And like trying to lock things down, you've heard of things like CIS or DISA-STIGs and so on. It's something that's becoming more common and widespread as organizations have to get cyber insurance. So fortunately, there is the macOS Security Compliance Project, which will help you build your security baseline. You can pick, say, NIST 853 Moderate. It'll present all the controls that are available. You don't have to choose all the controls. You shouldn't choose every control, but you can turn things on or off as needed. And you'll build your security baseline. It builds the documentation that you can provide to your security consultants or your vendors that are asking for it. And it'll also build configuration profiles and scripts to set those settings, as well as to check to make sure the systems are enforced. It's really cool. There have been multiple sessions here. There was a great one yesterday from somebody at Mount Holyoke College. Apple has a training course at training.apple.com/IT on the macOS Security Compliance Project. And there's also a video that Apple has. Talk to your SE. But super, super awesome tool for helping you build your security baselines. So when will macOS 15 ship? Again, fall. We had a trend here, macOS 11 was in November because that was part of the migration to Apple Silicon. And then we were late October for Monterey and Ventura. And then last year it was like, oops, surprise, it's out at the end of September. The new betas actually seem to be pretty stable. It wouldn't surprise me if we're looking at a September release again, but it could slip into October. So it's coming. Again, I don't worry about copying these down. This keynote slides will be available. But you definitely want to look at the What's New for IT document in Appleseed for IT, as well as the Managing Updates for IT. The video for What's New in Device Management covers a lot of the things. Apple has posted a lot of the device management things on GitHub, including all the new keys that are being set. And of course, Apple's platform deployment, device management, and security guides are pretty awesome. And there's some blog posts out there from Simple MDM and Kanji and Jamf. So that's the end of the formal presentation. I want to thank the people at Penn State, both past and present, and particularly people like Gretchen and Rusty, Chris, Joshua, Jamie, et cetera. We also owe a big debt of gratitude to all those former admins who have now moved on to work for the mothership. They are the reasons why we have things like configurator, DFU restore, activation lock in Apple Business Manager or School Manager, and so on. It's great to have those folks on the inside helping argue for us and push for us. Also awesome are the people who contribute on Slack. And also you for attending this conference or watching it on YouTube. The one advice I have is find some way to contribute to the community, something you've learned. No one's going to make, even if it's something widely known, no one's going to shame you for posting something you figured out. The community is really great in that regard. We don't put up with bullies and stuff like that. Don't hesitate to share something you've learned. Tonight, we are having Charles Con. This is in memory of Charles Edge, who was a well-known member of the Mac admin community and former Jamf employee. His cryptid.com site was absolutely essential for a lot of Mac management stuff in the past. Unfortunately, Charles passed away earlier this year, and we are doing this gaming event tonight in his memory. He was a great dude. He would share. You could ask you could ask him a question in Slack or Twitter or in person, and he would talk to you for an hour. He was he was a very giving guy, and really a tremendous loss for our community and especially to his family. So with that, there's the formal presentation, and we can now begin with questions.
Is there a minimum OS for the activation lock feature?
No, it's per device. So it works with 14 devices. I haven't tried it. I don't have I don't really have many Macs that are activation locked, but I do have a lot of iOS and iPadOS devices, and I know the 16 and 17 have worked. It's really a switch on Apple's back end. It's not on the OS release. You may have to DFU restore that Mac one more time after the lock is removed to get the device to recognize it's not there, but once it activates, it will be free and clear. So.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Get it over here. Watch your drinks. Whoop.
The rotating MAC address for macOS, is that something that is can users trigger that themselves if they want to rotate that on demand?
Yes, unless you set the profile to turn it off.
Right.
If it's just like iOS. If I have a profile that connects me to corporate wireless, the user doesn't have any control over that.
Okay.
But yeah, users can turn it off. The sticky part is if you've got devices out there today that, with a Wi-Fi profile, where you don't have that option anymore, and then macOS 15 ships and your MDM provider supports it, and you toggle it on, and you have to push that MDM profile to the devices. What does that do if they're currently connected to the network? And in the past, that behavior has been different between iOS and macOS. They haven't been consistent. So that's one of those, you've got to test that.
Okay, thanks.
Questions? People got to have questions.
Are you going to be selling those AI-powered pins you advertised earlier at the
Yeah. If I was smart, I would have, yeah. Got a bunch of them. Do you have one in the back? Oh, okay. No.
Where
Other questions?
I have one. So my individual organization has been hesitant to move to centralized print management. So I'm really familiar with cups and PPDs because it's the only way for us to get our printers to work. I assume if we moved over to centralized print management, it would solve the problems that we're going to have when we depreciate with cups. Is that going to be the case? Are we going to be forced to move to that or buy printers that work?
It's oftentimes difficult to tell how long it's going to take Apple for something to move from deprecated to being not available. And I'll give you the example of smart cards. The old Token D were deprecated in 10.7 and didn't actually stop working until 10.15. So, I think there's a general trend to want to move more towards like IPP type printing, internet printing protocol and stuff like that. The problem is people still had a lot of like old HP printers that didn't support that and stuff like that. So I think it's one of those, they're just waiting for attrition time, to do that. But will it require a centralized print server? It's really dependent upon what printers you have and what tech they support. Maybe is the answer, particularly if you have older printers that don't support, IPP and AirPrint, things like that. That seems to be the direction Apple wants to move everything to. Got another question here? Just down this.
Did you say deferrals are going away totally?
No, deferrals are not going away. They are moving to they're moving from the MDM framework to the DDM framework. So
Okay,
hopefully they work better. But,
Some CAD vendors are slow.
Yeah. Well, like I said, besides all the bugs in software update, there were all the weird bugs with deferrals, like around Intel Macs, where for example, it could accidentally update even if there was a deferral. A lot of problems with deferrals evolve around, I will not name the MDM vendor, but I will shame them, where they, you would set one setting in a restriction profile, they would set other things at default values. And then you would create a separate restrictions profile, the settings you wanted, and deploy that to the device. And the device actually had 2 profiles on it with different settings. So what was the net result? Undetermined. Which one got on the device first? Or what day of the week is it? So that's why you had tools like low profile that could be used to identify duplicate keys, and that's why that functionality was also added to Mac-Eval utility. So again, I think moving all this stuff, ripping it out of that restrictions and putting it all into software update will hopefully help those scenarios and help it be more reliable. And to be fair, Apple did put a lot of emphasis in making them more reliable, but it was kind of, fixing the barn door after the horses came home.
Adobe isn't the only problem.
Yeah. Got a question in the back. Might have to hop it here a little bit.
Send it to you, Pat?
Entra ID non-commercial, what's happening with that?
If you run in like a FedRAMP or GCC high type environment, you are unable to federate Apple Business Manager natively with that. That's where you have to like write your own connector or wait for Microsoft to release their own OpenID Connect connector and shared signals framework, be able to do that federation.
So high, I'm just regular GCC.
Yeah. So yeah, I think both GCC and GCC high are considered non-commercial.
Yes, I'm well aware of that.
So you can't federate, and yes, you're in the same boat that I am.
Okay, because currently it is working.
It's working. Okay, then you're don't touch anything.
Got it.
You mentioned that ADE doesn't work with virtualization on Apple Silicon.
Yeah,
Testing.
you can't test automated device enrollment workflows.
But in your opinion, does it make sense to keep an older like Intel Mac running like VMware Fusion for testing?
Or yeah, I mean, I definitely at that point recommend physical hardware. Maybe just run it directly. Especially, Apple Silicon for sure you would run directly because it's so easy to get that Mac back to a known good state using a configurator, restore, or erase all content and settings. Just send a wipe from your MDM. Okay. But yeah, I would definitely recommend physical hardware for testing automated device enrollment. That's the best way to do it today.
Thanks.
Another question
over here. My organization is all Silicon Mac, so this is more of a curiosity question versus practical, but open it to you to speculate and anybody else that wants to. But you mentioned people were worried with 15 that it wouldn't support Intel Macs. And I'm just kind of curious what the community thinks about, again, speculation-wise, when Apple will drop support for Intel Macs.
So Apple tends to support hardware for between 5 and 7 years. It's 2020. The last Intel Macs were like the 2019 MacBook Pros, the 2019 iMac, 27-inch, and the 16-inch and 13-inch Intel Macs. So it's 2024 now. That hardware is 5 years old. So at some point they're going to pull the plug at Intel. Now, to be fair, they sold the Mac Pro up until sometime in 2022. So I can imagine somebody in 2025 who spent thousands of dollars on one of those systems might be pretty upset if they pull the plug. But you can clearly see that they are starting to move with like the changes, for example, around managed device attestation, where they're only going to, it works today with Intel machines with Secure Enclave, but they're going to change that to only support Apple Silicon. So at some point, they're basically going to pull the plug on Intel. Whether that's next year or the year after, I don't know. My own organization, we have a hard limit of 5 years on hardware. If it's 5 years old, it goes. So all of our Intels, except for a couple of Mac Pros, are going to be on their way out in 2025. So the question I haven't determined yet, because I haven't done enough testing on Intel with macOS 15, is do I even want to nag my users to upgrade to it? Is it performant enough? Or do I let them continue on macOS 14 until they get replacement hardware? Good catch, good throw.
So just for clarity's sake, randomized MAC addresses can or cannot be turned off through MDM, Jam Pro.
They can be turned off if you have a profile to connect that device to a Wi-Fi network.
Okay.
That's the way it's been in iOS, and now it's going to be the way it's going to work on macOS.
Only with the profile they connect.
Right. That's how you can force it off, and it can't be turned on by the user. The user can also turn it off. If you don't have a profile controlling it, the user can turn it off. They can also turn it on. So I have worked in environments where access to networks are dependent upon documented MAC addresses. And I remember when the first devices reached that network that ran iOS and iPadOS 14, and it was non-IT people connecting to the network, and it's not working. Oh snap! go in and turn this off. Oh, okay, so now it's like standard instructions, got to turn this off, because it's a network that I don't own, so I can't deploy a profile to manage it. That's where it'd be nice to have that global off switch, but I think Apple is like, Apple does have concern over privacy, and I think they'd be afraid that organizations would just turn it off on every managed device.
There seems to be a lot of things that fall under Apple's privacy nomenclature.
Yeah, and obviously all the dialogues we've seen in macOS, all the things like PPPC and TCC, all the prompts to approve things and allow things and screen recording and so on has been a big sticking point for a lot of admins over the years, where they've kind of butted heads a little bit with Apple on. But then it's our fault. There's still stuff they could do better, in my opinion, but I've used the analogy before. I would love somebody to sit Tim Cook down in front of a new Mac that has Microsoft Teams freshly installed in it and join and present a call. That experience is not awesome. Another thing, if you upgrade a Mac to macOS 15, take note of every dialogue, like after upgrading, take note of every dialogue and screenshot you get. Because you're going to have to prepare documentation for your users, or you're going to find out if you can suppress some of those dialogues, or if some of them will go away as like clients are updated. I've had conversations with Apple before where they've been like, yeah, those network prompts you get, developers can put, why does Chrome need to scan my network? Or why does, managed software center scan my network? Developers can actually put explanations or reasons behind it in those dialogues, but many of them haven't. So maybe that would help. So, that's definitely the reason why you want to document all those things and then reach out not only to Apple about, can I suppress these or whatever, but also to those developers of these tools and ask them to, add that functionality.
You mean they don't want to tell you why they want to know all the prices in your home?
Right, exactly. Is Google going to tell you that? No. But, Managed Software Center for Monkey probably would, Greg Nagel will probably add that. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your time.